Happy Friday. Welcome to Law Moms Out Loud. I am Kate Lincoln Goldfinch.
And I'm Hannah Hembry Bell. And we are Law Moms
Out Loud.
Okay.
Totally botched that. We're in different locations today. Normally we're sitting right next to each other and it's a lot easier. But as you guys know, we are here to help lawyer moms grow as moms, lawyers, and people. And we often have guests here on our show. And today we're really excited to bring Mindy Gulati here as a guest. She is the founder of Fundamental Advisory, which is a consulting firm on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's also a fellow mama. Hannah and I belong to the Mother Attorney Mentoring Association of Austin, and Mindy's been very active in the mamas and as a personal friend, and we're so glad to have her here as an expert. So thanks for joining us, Mindy.
Hi.
So this topic we want to talk to you about, which is your area of expertise, is one that can sort of, I think, become just toss around words, in corporate culture. And everybody sort of talks about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, implicit bias, allyship. And all of these words, of course, have deep, important meaning, but they can be, I think, tossed around by people who don't have a full awareness of it. And so we're here to bring awareness to this issue and get us all sort of understanding what these terms mean. So could we just kick off by talking about why these words matter and what they mean?
Yeah, thanks. And again, thanks for having me. So definitely, I think these words get kicked around. I think that for a variety of reasons in the last couple of years, this topic has been more discussed. DEI has been around for a very long time, though, not just in the last couple of years. So the work to create equitable and inclusive spaces at work has been going on really since for a long time, but markedly, after Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so when discrimination and harassment became illegal. DEI efforts in the workplace are related to creating workplaces where people are, can bring themselves to work, can be valued, included, supported. The concept of equity oftentimes gets confused with equality, but with equity, we're really looking at supporting the person and not giving everyone the same treatment, but giving everybody the treatment that they need to be able to thrive and survive. And I think what's important sort of at this moment in DEI is to recognize that, everybody plays a role, that it is not just for those who need to be more included, to have to lead or to have to, engage in this work. Everybody really has a voice and a space and needs to be a part of this work. But DEI can veer off into unhealthy areas like checking the box, feeling like you only need to do DEI at work. One of the things that I hope we can talk about today a little bit is about the concept of bringing these conversations to your family and to your communities, right? It's really interesting because a lot of effort goes on in organizations and workplaces to bring about more inclusion, this sense that people get to know each other, build relationships and connectedness and trust each other so that they can build a better company. So that, a lot of the research shows that companies are more innovative, more productive, more efficient, the more diversity and inclusion that they have. But we don't often bring that into our relationships, right? So we don't often go out and think about who we spend our time with, who we call for advice, who we pick up the phone to, who our neighbors are, who we send our kids to school with, what sports teams, what our sports teams look like, right? Because I think, unfortunately, the United States, Austin, Texas, still remains a very segregated place. And so I really want people to think about DEI, not just in their work life, because that's a fantastic thing to do, but also when you leave work. How inclusive are you being? How open? How often are you asking yourself how you can support people in the way they need to be supported? How can you raise culturally competent, curious kids? And so that's something that I hope we can spend some time talking about. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is to be discerning when you hear DEI, when you hear workshops or trainings about implicit bias or allyship, try to dig a little bit deeper, right? Because all of this work is meant to reach a goal of creating more justice for people, a place where people really are thriving. We have hundreds of years of systems and policies and laws put in place that continue to marginalize and exclude people. And so it's not an overnight fix, and it shouldn't be a check the box activity, or we're definitely not going to get there. So.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is really interesting, this part about it being a way of life. And there's so many aspects and elements to this. And, you said, Mindy, something really important, which is that everyone plays a role. It's not just the job of the marginalized populations to advocate on their own behalf. I think one thing that can be challenging about this subject is that people get worried that they're going to do it wrong. They're going to say the wrong thing. And so then often people just say nothing because they're afraid about it. So that seems like one of the main, initial hurdles to talking about this stuff is getting over the fear of saying it wrong. It's like when you're speaking a new language, when you're in that phase where you use your grammar wrong, and sometimes you just don't even want to speak in front of people who are fluent. So how do you encourage people to get over that initial hump and be willing to make mistakes when they're talking about it?
Yeah, and I think that's a hurdle. Couple things is you have to be courageous and brave. You have to be humble. You don't know everything, and you're going to make mistakes. So if you have never learned certain things and you're just starting to learn them for the first time, you may make mistakes, right? But that doesn't mean you step back. I think fear, or I'm worried about saying something, or I'm worried that I'm going to unintentionally hurt someone, I really think that's a cop-out and a way to avoid and just perpetuate the continuation of the systems of oppression. And if you're benefiting from the systems that currently allow for certain people to make it and disallow others, you're really part of that. And so one thing that I heard recently, I heard someone put it in this really great way, which is that we've never done a good job in this country of having this conversation, so you're not going to do any worse. So there's a very low bar. And so lean into it, right? Have these conversations. This is why I encourage you to make conversations around racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, right? I encourage you to bring these into all of your conversations with your friends and your family, because practice, it helps you, right? And so the more you talk about it, the more comfort you'll have in it. And if you mess up, apologize and take a step back and say, what did I do, right? Think about maybe why you said something wrong. Where is that coming from? But again, I get this question a lot of like, I'm just really nervous to have these conversations. It's a skill to have a difficult conversation. It's a skill to be able to navigate some of these conversations. But I think if you say, I'm nervous, I'm going to say something wrong, be more nervous that everybody's watching you not say something. So if you're not saying something, I guarantee you people are watching you be like, look at that person not saying anything. So say something and mess up. Say something and do it because you want to make a change, right? People will have far more empathy for you. People will give you a lot more grace if you try than if you stand back and just not do or say anything. And so, and again,
I have a thought here, Mindy, because that's not the message I get as a very basic white girl, okay, very non-anything. What I hear is, hey, white girl, be quiet. This is not your conversation. Don't be the one to speak. Because this conversation is difficult for me in that I don't think I'm afraid. So I don't, the idea, I'm not copping out. I'm not afraid. I feel that the messaging around this topic and knowing when to speak, when I have heard from people who are of those marginalized groups to say, this is not your conversation. Do not speak. Do not stand up and say. And so for me, the space I've landed on is saying less in respect of, I don't have the answers to this. I have not experienced racism ever. I have not experienced a lot of these other things. And so I just I have a difficulty with that, reconciling what you're saying with what my experience has been in conversations where this comes up. Now, the only thing that I ever feel comfortable doing, that I think for me is kind of towed the line, is what I would do for Kate or any of us, of like in a group where it happened to me just the other day, where I was on a conversation with someone, and it was a female attorney and this male attorney, and I was not in the driver's seat of this conversation, and he just kept speaking over her and not letting her finish. And I had my gut reaction to say, you know what, so and so, if you let her finish one sentence, the conversation might get somewhere. But I also didn't want to stand in like she could defend herself, So for me, I'm just bringing the perspective of someone who feels very frozen in this space. And I feel that not from you, clearly, but from it's me of not saying things has truly been my way to try to honor, because that's what I know I've heard and seen and read from people of those groups, like shut up. So I don't know how those two go together.
So I'm not going to speak to your experience or what people have said to you, but I think there's more nuance in this. So I don't think, and again, I'm not going to speak for Black women, Latina women, etc. But I think that what they don't want you to do is to presume that you know what they've went through so you can speak to their experience, right? They don't also want white women to occupy all the space, take all the air out of the room, right? The biggest beneficiary of affirmative action is white women, right? Not the folks that I think originally were intended to benefit. And so I think there is some conflict there, or a need again for humility and learning to take a step back and learning to not be the one always leading, right? But I think that's different than fear of conversation, right? Because when you said, I haven't experienced racism, you haven't experienced racism as a white woman, but you've been around, certainly you've heard racist statements as a white person. There's not one of us living in the United States who haven't been around that. So you have witnessed racism. So you've been around it at some point. Someone has said these things. That is your opportunity to speak up, right? That is your opportunity to push back and challenge and say, hey, I don't agree with that, or why are you saying that, right? And again, when women of color, Black women, brown women, Indigenous women speak, say things like, white women need to be quiet and white women need to listen. I think that's a very valid point. And I do that as well, right? But I don't think that there's a one or the other. I think it's a combination of both. I think that white folks have a really big role in creating racial equity and justice in the United States. And I think that our role is not to be out front, taking up all the airtime. Our role is to support, to push, as lawyers, to leverage our legal power to create, actual changes. But again, like, I think that there's differences of opinion. I think the more in community you are, like actual community with people that are different than you, that helps you be able to have and navigate these conversations. If you look at the 10 people, if you pulled up your phone and looked at the last 10 people that you text who's not your family, look at the diversity of those people, right? Are they all the same race as you? Are they all the same religion as you? Are they all the same ethnicity, background, education background as you? And if you don't have diversity of the 10 last people you've texted, that's an indication that you're not really leaning into this. And again, like I'm saying, I'm not trying to say you haven't had the experience where you've actually had a Black woman or a Latina woman say, hey, you need to stop talking. I don't know if you've had that exact experience, but I think collectively, and this is the work I navigate in every day, I don't really hear Black and brown women saying white women shut up and don't say anything. I think they're saying, hey, give us an opportunity to be the ones to lead. But they generally want us, they want and need our support. And so
for me, it's like, it's this idea of course, if overt racism, in front of my face, I will come for whoever is saying. I mean, that's duh. I mean, that doesn't happen in my experience. I mean, because I would never tolerate that. And I will come for you. It's it's in those more nuanced and I think we're all a part of these, like, and this is the Law Moms Out Loud, but like we've been a part of these national lawyer mom groups, and you know, conversations having to do with race, or like maybe not directly having to do with race, and it going to that conversation. And I think my experience with that, hey, be quiet, is in that context where for me, I mean, dipping my toe out to try to say, it's like, oh my God, what could I mean, if somebody said something just like directly, insanely, right? I mean, that's an easy response, like, hey, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's this other stuff that you don't even know is gonna turn into this, and that you say something and it's like turns into this whole thing. And I've seen that happen to people, and it eventually shut down and crippled those groups. So that I don't know what you're supposed to do.
So I mean, I think the thing is that I think you need to lean into what comment you said that got some reaction, right?
Well, it wasn't me. Oh, I wouldn't say.
Yeah,
I didn't say. Yeah. I know better. No way.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, and I think someone just made a comment, right? I think online is a little bit different, right? So I don't live my life online. I don't have a lot of debates or arguments online because I think it's pointless, right? I have enough to actually do in real life to like not debate online. But I think it's okay if people push back on us too, right? So if every conversation you have is comfortable, you're not having enough good conversations, right? If you're not being pushed, if someone's not calling you out sometimes, you're not entering into the zone where change is going to happen, right? And I'm not saying this is comfortable, and I'm not saying that, and I'm not going to dissect every single. I don't know what has happened. I know what happened in the Lawyer Mom group. One of my posts was the last post ever in one of those Lawyer Moms groups. So I was in the thick of it, right? But there's a difference between us making assumptions and coming in and saying, well, you should think this, right? That's where a lot of white women get smacked down, is like, well, you should do this, or you should think this, or I don't know why you've never done this, because you don't bring a historical context with you when you say those things. You don't bring nuance, complexity, understanding. And so if you've ever been in a place where someone tells you to stop talking, or says, hey, you're not welcome here, or this isn't your conversation, you're going to immediately feel defensive, and that's the normal human instinct. But take a step back and do a deeper analysis of why am I being told this, right? Then that's when you do listen, right? And it takes practice. But again, we have been having these conversations wrong for so long. There's not a lot you can do that's worse than what's been going on. So let's just continue to lean in on them. And I think it takes, honestly, a lot of energy and effort to have a deep context for why people feel the way they do. And the other thing too is humans are individuals. You cannot generalize. I cannot say that if I'm going to have a conversation with a Black woman, this is going to be the result. That person is her own person, right? So again, I have these difficult conversations. This is the work that I do every day. I don't always get it right, but I lean into it, and I think I do this work in a really thoughtful and intentional way. But it's a lifetime of learning, right? And this is why I'm such an advocate of bringing your kids into this, because I was very fortunate to be raised in a family that was committed to racial justice, an all-white family from Utah, right? That was committed to racial justice. I have been having these conversations about white supremacy culture, about privilege, about racism, anti-racism, anti-Semitism, feminism, since I was born, right? So I feel like I'm equipped to do it because it's always been around me. And I didn't have one point of view. I had a complexity point of view of why are we here, right? Why do we have historically excluded folks? Do people get disparate treatment? That's not something new that I learned in my 20s and 30s, right? That's something I grew up with. And so if we move these conversations to our families and to our communities, if your kids learn to have these conversations when they're 4, right? And they learn to have these conversations, they're going to be in a different situation than a lot of people are as they get older. And I find that to be one of my privileges, is that I did grow up in a family that did not tell me the white narrative of race in the United States, right? I didn't grow up with that. And so I don't have to unlearn some of the things that a lot of people around me have to unlearn. And that to me is one of the greatest gifts my family could have ever given me, to be honest with you. And that's why I'm such an advocate of bringing this work to our kids and to our homes and to our day-to-day interactions, because it's going to help your kids set them up for success. But again, fear is normal. None of us want to be uncomfortable. None of us want to go to a conversation where we're going to get hit. I had a conversation this week where folks were coming after me, right, for about 4 hours. And it was painful and difficult. But you know what? Like, I didn't run away, and I didn't say, like, you know, I didn't even disagree, right? I just listened to learn. And those are the ways that we build our competency and our courage and our strength to be able to have these conversations. Because honestly, like my kids and even how I am, these things aren't as scary to me. It's not scary for me to talk about race. It's not scary to me to talk about bigotry and racism, because it's been a part of my existence my whole life. And that's really where I wish the shift would happen. And it's some places it's happening, and some places it's becoming even worse with book bans and with, you know, with the way that we can't teach certain things in certain schools. And so yeah, but I mean, I hear your point. But I again would encourage you not to be silent, not to tap out. And then if somebody does tell you, hey, you know, you're taking up too much space, or this isn't something you should be commenting on, take a step back and try to figure out why. And I'm not saying that they're going to be right all the time, but it gives you that point of reflection.
Well, and nobody's, you know, said that to me directly. I've watched it be said to groups, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I'll be honest about that. Like, mm-hmm. No one said, Hannah, because I wasn't ever being the one. I try to listen more, talk less in this area, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's good to listen, but I also think, you know, the next step of listening to learn is then start to engage. But again, don't take the air out of the room. Don't make assumptions. And our walks of life as white folks are a lot different than the walks of life of Black and brown folks. I mean, they just are. And we have to just recognize that.
Mindy, I would like to talk about this conversation about raising our kids, you know, the right way to talk about this. It sounds like your parents modeled this for you. Mm-hmm. So you went into motherhood sort of with a familiarity about how to do it. And it's like, mm-hmm. conceptually, watch the movies, read the books, have the conversations, make it part of the narrative of the family. Mm-hmm. Do you have more specifics? Mm-hmm. And even for phases of life, you know, my kids are 5 and 10, and the 10-year-old is reading The Hate U Give. And my babysitter said the other day, are you sure that's, you know, appropriate for your kiddo? There's police brutality stuff in there. And I said, yes, absolutely. I mean, I haven't read the book. Hopefully it's not too violent, but I want my kid to read that book. Mm-hmm. But that's obviously, I mean, it's different than the 5-year-old. So how do you start it out and keep it going?
Yeah. So I think the thing is that if you are committed to work of justice for everyone, right? For whether it's racial justice, gender equity, et cetera, is fill your, you know, early age, babyhood, right? Fill your library with diverse authors, you know, right? With the diversity of worldview. Don't just even buy authors from the United States, right? Like there's tons of book lists out there. There's a great book club called Atlas Book Club that they have lots of book lists. You can find book lists. So fill your library. And then what I will tell you is, on the topic of hard conversations, sometimes some awesome children's books are out there now, like picture books, right? There's one on gender identity. It's a picture book. And I can't remember the name of it right now, but I love it because it actually, for a lot of people, when they read it with their kids, they learn something. So kids' books are boiled down to like very basic concepts because it's for like a 3-year-old. But then you, as a 30-year-old or 40-year-old, you can learn, and you can actually learn the language. So it's okay if you don't know the language, right? We don't know what we don't know. Like that's a very basic concept. So if you're trying to figure out like how to talk to your kids about transgender folks, right? Buy some kids' books around it. If you don't have the language, read those books with your kids, right? So there's books. I also think another thing is that ask your kids things like, what do you think? Ask that question a lot. What do you think? Ask them what they think, and then say, what do you think if you were that other person? If you start building that muscle of empathy, so I do that all the time, right? Like, no matter where we're at, like you're somewhere, you watch something, you're at the Thinkery in Austin, the Children's Museum. Some kid's having a tantrum because his mom wants him to go to a different part of the exhibit. Instead of just being like, wow, look at that kid having a tantrum, be like, how would you feel? How do you feel when you have to leave? Or what do you think that kid is feeling? Or how must it feel for this, right? So I ask a lot of questions like, what do you think? What would you do if you were them? What do you think about, what do you think they're thinking? And then the other thing too is I have a 9 and a 10-year-old. Is I started really introducing concepts of philosophy and critical thinking when they were about 7 years old. There's a great DK Reader book called The Children's Book of Philosophy. Each page has like one philosophical question. And some of them are like, do we exist, right? Is color actually real? I mean, and it blows their mind a bit. My son would like crawl under a blanket when we do philosophy and cry because it's so mind bending. But the whole concept is to get them primed for like really complicated questions, right? And that book is fantastic on philosophy. Parents probably should read it because unless you took philosophy in college, you probably haven't like thought about these issues. And then that also gets that muscle of critical thinking. And then I'll give you a contemporary example that has been going on in my family this week is my son has to write a report on Francisco Coronado, right? I have now had to relearn about Francisco Coronado, born in 1510. So, I've actually done my homework, died when he was 44 years old. And the book that the school had him read has like this one section about when he goes, on his first expedition to spread Christianity and find gold. He comes upon this native culture called the Zunis, and the Zunis are like, we don't want you to come into our village, right? And the book says something like the Zunis were really hostile, and the Zunis attacked Coronado's men, right? And then so we're reading this, and I'm talking to my son, and I'm like, what would you do if you were a Zuni? What do you think? And he's like, I'd do the same thing. This guy's coming in to our village. Of course, like you're going to defend your. So it's like in a lot of books, you can ask questions about historical things, right? There's also a great book that every family should have. It's called The People's History of the United States. Buy it. And then as they read curriculum at school, have them read the chapter of the book. Because like, for example, the People's History of the United States starts with Christopher Columbus, right? And it has a different perspective, right? There were like 60 million, estimate 60 million indigenous North American folks living here, right? Or the North American folks living here when Christopher Columbus came, and they're just wiped out, right? And so I think it's like through those kinds of things. I also think that we have to be really mindful in the United States about how policies, redlining, the law that all of us as lawyers are part of. Has made it really difficult to live amongst people that are different than you. And that when you share no community and no space with people that are different than you, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, that's a big hurdle to get over. And so as you're raising your kids also, I point that out, but then we also try to move and be in spaces where they are around different types of folks. And it's not just for diversity's sake. It's not like just take them to a cultural festival and be like, hey, we get a gold star because we made it to a cultural festival. But it's like, why do you think these folks don't go to your schools or live in your neighborhoods? Or why don't you think that, these folks have the same access, and have conversations about it. And then the other thing too is don't be scared to introduce kids to hard topics. Kids can deal with it. I'm not saying that you expose them to all brutality, right? I don't think that's the way, but I also don't think you expose them to none of the brutality, right? There's a great picture book called The Middle Passage. Buy it. It's called The Middle Passage. It's a beautiful picture book. It is incredibly painful. Yeah. I will tell you, I ordered it for my kids, and I was in tears when I looked through it. But it's like, they have to have that. So when I go back to my childhood, there was a PBS special called The Eye on the Prize. And I'm telling you that because my mom had me watch that was a turning point for me, because the eye on the prize and what I watched and what I remember as a very small child was watching, police officers hose and set dogs upon Black folks in the South, right, during Jim Crow and during, civil rights movement, and just feeling like I cannot stand by and ever let this happen. Like, that's it. Like, there's no possible way, right? And so I was exposed to that as brutality, right? And it's okay. It doesn't make you don't need to keep your kids in this bubble of everything is, sunshine and rainbows, right? Because what you want them to be is to be advocates for change as they get older. And that's what this newer generation is going to be, because they have so much access to information, right? I mean, it's different. And again, cultivate content for your kids like we couldn't, right? I'm 43. We had one channel on TV for cartoons, right? And everything we watched, and we all got the same message. Now you have Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu. Like, find the shows that are representative of difference, and talk about them with your kids, right? Every time we watch a show, it's like, how would that make you feel? We were watching the Yankees game the other night, and Aaron Judge got walked instead of being able to hit his 61st home run. And instead of just like being like, dang it, he got walked, right? We're big Yankees fans. I was like, what do you think he feels like when they intentionally walk him? And Carmen, my 9-year-old, was like, it's so unfair. They're not even giving him a shot. Like, why are they trying to take this away from him by walking him, right? Mm-hmm. And so just build the muscle of empathy is one really important part of raising kids that can become true advocates and allies.
This is so good. I have a specific scenario, Mindy, that a friend of ours, her son went through, and I'd love to hear from you. This is from the perspective of a kid her son is Jewish, and 2 times in his life, in 7th grade, someone used an anti-Semitic slur against him, and he didn't respond. He didn't tell his mom right away. When he finally told her, he didn't want her to tell anybody. He didn't want that kid to get in trouble. He just didn't want any, fuss over it. Mm-hmm. And she helped him think through what to do the next time. And 2 years later, it happened again, and he was able to stand up for himself. But what are the ways that those of us who have kids who might be oppressed, or, I have a non-binary child. I mean, how do we talk to our kids about when you confront oppression, this is how you deal with it?
Yeah. So I think it's a great question. And I think, there's kind of 2 sides I want to take. So the first side is for the person that's being, the person that's being harmed, right? I think that if and I'm not going to speak for somebody, I can speak as a woman who has been, harmed or been in situations where I've been, degraded, catcalled, made fun of, harassed, right? And I think it's almost like, I think what you have to teach kids is it's very fact specific, right? So you want to be safe first and not get yourself into something, right? I have to be careful because I basically would want to fight people like on the street at any moment if I could. But obviously I'm 4'11" and I'm not as strong as I may think I am. But I think you talk to them about the realities of what they may face, right? So I my kids are multiracial, multi-ethnic. We talk about things that they could encounter, that they may encounter, right, that are different than my experience. And I can't speak to that experience because I'm not going to have that experience, right? So I think you equip them with tools, and maybe it's just like a 5 checklist. Like, you confront it, you walk away, you seek help, and maybe that's just 3 things, confront it, walk away, seek help. And then you sort of make a game plan for those things. But I think kids deserve honesty and authenticity about what may happen. And then I think that, if you're raising non-binary kids, it's good to have a group of parents who you all can strategize together. If you're raising Black kids, I know a lot of my Black friends, they obviously, that is a reality for their kids, and they talk to each other about what to do. But I think you can make these plans. The other side is for those of us, or any of us, right, who have kids who are maybe going to be witness to this. This is where you want to teach them what to do in these scenarios, right? This is why exposing your kids to hard conversations are important, because at some point our kids are going to witness transphobia. They're going to witness homophobia. They're going to witness anti-Semitism. And what do they do in that scenario, right? And that's why you want your kids to read and know these things, right? Let them know what happened. Why if someone calls somebody this name, what does that mean, right? And then how to intervene, right? And that's moving from that bystander where you simply watch and be like, gosh, that shouldn't have happened, to moving into supporting, right? And moving into upstander. And that's, and there's lots of different ways to do that. But I talk to my kids about that a lot, in terms of like, what do you do when you see harm? And again, it's a calculation. It's like, sometimes you intervene, and sometimes you intervene toward the aggressor. Sometimes you intervene and get the person who's being harmed out of the way. Sometimes you go seek help. Sometimes you tell an adult, right? And again, it's fact specific. So I try to equip them with kind of what to do at any scenario. And then you have to model that for your kids too, right? So I think a big part of this is modeling. So for, Kate, you're raising a non-binary child. You're not non-binary, but your child's going to watch you if someone says something to you negative, right? How people treat you. So kids watch everything that you do, right? We were at a zoo in Houston a couple years ago, and there was a guy like beating his child and like smacking her like as hard as he could. And she was about 3. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm probably going to go to jail today because I'm going to go confront the person, right? But it's like I modeled for my kids that you just don't watch that stuff happen and don't say anything, right? And I did like make a calculation not to actually like physically confront him, but to go close to him, to stare at him, to gather a crowd around me, to make sure that he stopped the behavior. And then I went and got the police, right? But your kids are going to watch you. And so if you're at a dinner party and somebody uses a racial slur, or your grandpa or their uncle says something about, a certain group of people that's negative, they'll watch you if you don't say something. They're watching you. And so, and they're watching you for how to take care of themselves, and they're watching you for how to take care of others. And so you have to be mindful. That's why parenting is so dang stressful, because they're watching everything you do, and they're going to model it, and they're going to remember it, because I remember what my parents did, right? And so I hope that answered your question. It's not specific because every scenario is different, but I think you have to be, I think kids can take honesty. And I think that's how you actually build trust with your kids, is by being real with them about the world that they're going to get into. Right. And I raise my kids in a very gentle parenting type way, but I also they're not they understand the complexity of life, the complexity of humans. I was a criminal defense attorney for a long time. So we talk a lot about people who commit crime, right? We talk a lot about people who are accused of crime, who didn't do it, right? We talk about people who did the crime, and what do they, what must it feel like to have made such a big mistake? And we just have a lot of deep conversations. We still have a lot of fun, right? I'm not the joy of the party usually, right? So, but I can still be a little bit of fun, right? I'll go bowling occasionally and these kinds of things, but I think at every chance, watching a Yankees game, doing a Coronado book report, you can bring in some context and conversations with your kids that will help them. So.
Well, and I think the big takeaway from the conversation that I'm hearing is modeling and seeking out empathy. And that if we can start there, and some exposure from as young as we can, and some of our kids are big, and that's not, as young as we can is today, to work on that and to cultivate the empathy piece. So thank you so much, Mindy, for sharing that with us, and opening our eyes up to this conversation, and to navigate those waters, but it sounds like err on the side of action, and that over not, and not taking, the sideline approach. So there's one thing we always do each week on the show. It will go through our things. I think the first one might be talk about a lot of books. Man, we're going to have to pull forward those links. I mean, I've got, look on my Remarkable, like the list. But real quick, guys, what is everybody reading this week? Who wants to go first?
I'll tell you the book I'm reading. I'm reading a book called The Third Reconstruction by Peniel Joseph. He's a UT professor. Just saw him speak last week. It's fantastic. That's a really important book. I love books. I have lots of recommendations. I think that the other thing I'll highlight about what you're reading is there's often now a kids version of really heavy adult books. So buy the kids version, right? The Hate You Give, there's a kid version too. So there's different versions. Just Mercy, there's a kids version. So that's something my son recently read. So yeah, that's what I'm reading.
Great. Well, mine's quick because I'm not ready to do a book report yet because it's on October 6th when we are doing the show with Chandler Baker, who is the author of the Whisper Network and The Husbands. And so she's going to be our guest and we're going to be discussing her books and being an author and all that. So I am being a good student and doing my reading and also really enjoying it. It's a fun story.
Oh yeah, it's so good. I enjoyed that book a lot. Mine, I'm still on the same one, The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, the arc of story and the hero's journey, and just really looking at myth and religious and spiritual stories and things like that, and how that arc of the human experience, really since we've ever been telling stories, which is since we've been around. So super duper interesting. Okay. What about dominant thoughts? This is the part where we talk into each week. We found that you may have a bunch of thoughts in a day, but one thing seems to kind of circulate in your mind for the week. So does anybody want to go first on their dominant thoughts this week?
I'll share mine. Mine is, it's okay to do things differently. It is okay to completely change the way you do something. There's no shame. Don't take your ego with you. It's okay to do things very differently.
That's good.
I love that. What about you, Kate?
Mine is this idea of emotional hooking in codependent relationships and how we can just decide to be sort of Teflon and not get hooked. And when you've built a pattern in a relationship with anyone in your life, your kids, your friends, your parents, whatever, you build these patterns where you kind of hook each other, and that's the way you learn to engage. And a new paradigm means like turning yourself into Teflon and not getting hooked, and it can be disconcerting on the other end of that. So I'm thinking about the Teflon and the emotional hook. This is a concept from Marla Mattinson, who was one of our guests way back, and my mind's spinning on it. But how about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I've been thinking this week, really. I mean, I was trying to figure out what was I going to share. Lots of thoughts. I think being in awareness, self and just sort of present tense awareness as a way to navigate the things that come and go in a day, and just being in that state of flow and non-resistance. So like yesterday, I had a day, which is going to lead into my gold star in just a second, but I had a day yesterday. So many things from sun up to way past sundown. And I had told Paula, I was like, look, if somebody followed me around with a TV camera yesterday, they just said, we're just going to cut it here. We've got enough for like a week. We don't need any more footage. But I was unflappable. Sort of every single thing that happened, it didn't ruffle me, didn't get my heart rate up. It didn't change my inner set point. And it was just being in this state of flow and non-resistance and just self-awareness to watch the things come and go and not let that invade my personhood. So it's really practicing, I guess, so the dominant thought / dominant attempt for me this week was to sit in that space. So that goes in, I'll go first on gold stars, where we each have different gold stars. Mine is kind of my gold star of being like that yesterday. And as a mom, I think I'm going to give myself a gold star because I was on the way to court about an hour from here. And it was an important court date for my client. It's very important. And some of our hearings and stuff are not that big of a deal, but this one was pretty material. And I had 2 members of my team with me who were coming to observe and learn and watch court. There were good lawyers on both sides to watch. And I'm not the only lawyer on even our side, but anyway. So on the way out there, all of a sudden I get a FaceTime call and learn that my son has cut open his toe, like a big old cut. And I FaceTime, there's bloody towels everywhere. And I have this moment of, oh no, my client needs me. Her situation, her child's online. I'd just been talking about her and her kid and all this. My son needs me. Practically, I'm now 30, 40 minutes away. What am I going to do? And I had this brief moment while I'm driving. It happens like that. What do? Do I turn around and go back? I'm late to court or don't make it to court at all. But my son needs me. And he's like, Mom, you don't have to come if you don't want to. It's like, there's no not want. And then it just, this clarity came in. My priority is my son. Forever and always, he is my priority. This is an easy decision. Turn around, go back. And in that piece, I just had total peace. I called the other attorneys and let them know, and everybody was super understanding. Besides, I was late. I did miss 30 minutes of a hearing. So, I mean, that was not super. But turned around and came back and was there for my son. And he told me at least 5 times, Mom, I'm so glad you were here. Thank you so much for coming. And after making that decision, it just used the priorities and being in my self-awareness and was calm and owned my decision. I'd made the decision. I was going to go back. So I wasn't going to spend a bunch of anxiety time worrying about court and what happened because I wasn't there. Just a decision's been made. This is the one. I'm going to let whatever those consequences are go and deal with them at the time, but not add guilt onto myself. So for me, very mom goal started. Also, he's okay. Instead, we talked the doctor out of 6 stitches, and instead we did a special glue on the toe. So I think we're going to be okay. It's going to be all right. But it was a whole thing.
How about you, Mindy? What's your gold star for the week?
My gold star is that I am completely smashing the patriarchy at a very large, very prolific company. And I did something very important and huge undertaking I've been working on for about 8 months, and launched it on Monday and had a really great day and great conversation. So mine's personal, and I'll give me a silver star for my help on the Coronado report this week too, for the mom.
There we go.
I'm not giving myself a gold because I was way too frustrated, but silver. I'll get a silver.
Well, I think I'm going to get like a bronze star because mine is very frivolous. But those of you who are listening and not watching, you kind of miss out on this. But mine is a personal star. I bought the cutest new outfit because I'm in Atlanta, and I'm going to show you guys. I stopped at this little shop, and they had this little sweatsuit that had sparkly designs on it with matching shorts. And I bought it, and I love it. It makes me so happy.
Suns and moons and rainbows. I mean, Kate, very you. That is very fun. I would like, I mean, you may have to go get me the matching ensemble so that we can twin it up
okay.
on our next trip.
Well, I'll call you because there's options.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mindy. This has been a super interesting and insightful episode. I think we all have a lot of room to grow, and we are grateful for the work that you're doing and having those difficult conversations and helping lead in that space. And there's so much more to talk about. I'm sure that this will be a topic that keeps coming back up because we didn't get to talk a lot about allyship and what that means and exactly what do we do when we start talking and moving. So we'll look forward to that on a future episode.
Awesome.
So, thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.